This is episode 30, and this week I've got something special for you on the Soul Tree Project. We're going to drive to Buena Vista and visit my mentor, Dr. Roger Strachan, who developed the self-soul-spirit model and has been pioneering the new psychology for decades now. Dr. Strachan has mentored me closely in Gestalt therapy, the self-soul-spirit model, and understanding genetic psychology, and really giving me tremendous insight into how humans work. And I'm so excited to share this with you all. I think it's extremely important that we're passing his legacy down and sharing it with the world. So please enjoy. I'm going to hit the road here in a few minutes, and we're going to just have an amazing time. We're going to drive to Buena Vista, Colorado. It's about a 2.5 hour drive, and we're going to go see Dr. Strachan, Self, Soul, Spirit. Enjoy. Okay, so we've arrived here in Buena Vista. It's absolutely gorgeous here. It's a nice fall day, and Roger's just down the street from where we're staying, so let's go see him. Quite a day to get out here, and I'm so glad I'm here. Thanks for having me, and I think we've got something exciting in store for all the people out there.
I do too. Never would I have dreamed when I met you 6 years ago and did your mandala, and we began to work, and I then followed you through college and tried to be available to you in ways that courses you took and how you studied, and we began a mentorship between myself and yours. And I have to tell you, you're finer than frog hair. That's a line that came out of the Midwest years and years ago, off the farms. And what it means is you really do have yourself together, and what a great honor it is for me to be your mentor. And particularly at this time of my life when I'm in some ways finishing up with many of the people I have mentored. And but you are a diamond in the rough that's showing yourself. I watched you through the college, and I've watched the way you worked. And when you first approached me on a podcast, we just did a couple casual ones, one with me and one with some of my colleagues. And then we decided, let's do this.
Yep.
So we're going to be doing 2 or 3 things, and I think it's very exciting. One, we're going to do this. You name it. What are you going to call it?
We're going to call it Conversations with my mentor, Dr. Roger Strachan. Or just Dr.
I love
Strachan.
It. Yeah, so it'll be Ryan and me. And it's obviously a takeoff of Tuesdays with Maury, but we're going to let them have their day. This is a brand new thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to do it in a casual way. And one of the things we're going to do with this series of podcasts is you'll bring me things with your clients, and we'll do supervision.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing you'll bring me is where you're going
Mm-hmm.
in your career, so other young men can see how we work that. And in the process, we'll use your mandala as well as mine in our conversations, so that
Right.
it's live and real and in the here and now.
Right, and we still need to explain what mandala is, which is coming
We have to
soon.
explain what the mandala is.
I'll just interject here briefly. Really, for me, the self-soul-spirit model is one of the finest models out there, as far as working with the human psyche and understanding the philosophy of just being a person. And one of the things I really love about it is how it combines the genetic science
Right.
with the spiritual components that resonate with so many people that
Right.
have been left out of rationalist
Exactly.
post-enlightenment thinking. And I think it takes an extremely sophisticated philosophy to bridge those two things. And I think that part of what you've done is that. And so, from a philosophical standpoint, I'm excited about that. From a coaching, therapeutic standpoint, and a transformational standpoint, I'm really excited about continuing to learn how to work with people better and be more effective.
You know, the thing is that nothing is new, and Solomon said it, but we recreate it in different ways. And I began my college career in 1953, and we were told, go to school, get as many degrees as you can. I ended up getting 5, and go to work.
Yep.
And give back. It was right after the Second World War, and I watched my parents and grandparents rebuild this country, and that enthusiasm. When I went, I didn't go without a history. At 19 years old, I did have a history. And part of it, to link in the genetics, was being on the farmland outside of Dayton, Ohio. Both my mother and stepfather were involved in the war effort and went to work every day. So I got farmed out to great aunts and great uncles and aunts that had farms. And I saw genetics in the happening. When I got to college, it was shortly after Victor Ramey and a committee began in 1946. And by 1949, they put out the Boulder model out of the University of Colorado. And in that model for the Ph.D. program was 2 things. You are a practitioner, and you're also a scientist. So it was called the scientist-practitioner model. You had to learn as much in biology, neurology, everything that applied to the human from a biological point of view, including genetics, as well as the clinical work. That has since changed, and the biological component has been taken out. But as we speak, one of the things you've been exposed to now, and one of the things we'll talk about in these casual conversations, is that in 2003, the genome was completed. And since that time, here we are, this many years later, and the research that's coming out is amazing. Tom Insel, 4 years ago, as head of the National Institute of Mental Health, declared the diagnostical manual as invalid.
Right.
And we'll be talking somewhat about what the National Institute is doing about that now. And what we're going to do is apply it.
Yep.
Our times together will be working with you who've been trained in the self-soul-spirit model, more about genetics as it applies to your clients, more about your own learning, and the whole notion of living a life of self, soul, spirit.
Yep.
The self is the genetics. The soul is the life force.
Yep.
And we now know and can claim where that comes from. And the spirit is the great unknown and the mystery. You know, the reason I chose self, soul, spirit, because they're common terms. and they have a history, and a history of being understood in the definitions. There's so many different ways we've talked over the many hundreds of years about self, and as we think of humankind and we refer to ourselves. My oldest granddaughter, in referring to self, said, and her name was Erin, she said, "Ernie me." I love that. That came out of her when she was developing her own set of linguistics, and she referred to herself as Ernie me. And I think that really hits the nail on the head. We see ourselves as having an entity.
As our own entity?
As our own entity. We see ourselves as being real. It's not that philosophically we can't question that, because we've never answered the great British philosopher Berkeley. We pronounce it Berkeley here and have a university named after him. And he said, prove to me that we're not just the figment of somebody's imagination. So all of this could be a great big dream. But we've chosen to believe that we're real. Mm-hmm. And so we use terms that are related to that. So the word self then has that kind of long history of identity and of manifestations. The word soul is the most amazing thing, because how this universe got started, why it would operate under the basis of a life force. It could operate as an energy and we wouldn't have bodies. It's chosen to have a structure. We have bodies, just as animals and plants and etc. And the soul is the life force of that body. It is not directly connected to spirituality, though in my thinking, the soul prepares the self for deliverance to the universe at the end of life. I have studied many different forms of the so-called afterlife, and as you know, they range from religious points of view of heaven to reincarnation and so on. Most philosophers who accept the soul and the life force believe that it leaves the body and is in the universe. Now that's where the argument starts for spirit. There's a line in the New Testament. Paul says, "Now we see darkly, and then we shall see more distinctly, more purely." And I think that's a very interesting thing from a theological point of view. What it really says, though, is that there's so many things going on energetically in the universe, the various kinds of fields of what we think of in quantum physics, that we don't know yet. We can't access those.
Yeah.
And I used to teach my students, if I take the electromagnetic scale and put it about this here, this is about what we see. So there's all this out there that we don't see.
We're only seeing a fragment.
We're only seeing a fragment. Now, the reason I use the word spirit is because it is common. We could use anything. I'm now going to go back and talk about that. We could use spirit in the sense of the great mystery, or we could use it as the origin. There's a lot of different terms. Nonetheless, spirit carries that connotation of a universal, and it is the ultimate of the universe. It is the essence of life, and we will continue to argue and wrestle and create the ways we got here and the origins. But what most of us in science and even in philosophy do is start with what we have. And so the model that was created here is based on the idea of some of the elements of induction and then mainly deduction. The model was made in lieu of not having, as I said earlier, the genome. With the genome now, the research is exponential. And we're moving from what's kind of called a wet lab, where we do designs and research, to logarithms and computers. So that our times for gathering huge amounts of data and shrinking it into predictabilities and so forth is tremendously expanded. And that's the wave of the future right now. And our technology increases. We can now do a genome in a relatively short period of time. Now,
but you were onto the genome before.
I was onto it as I saw my colleagues studying it. Okay.
Back in the 70s?
No, we were studying it then on the basis of observation and collecting of data based on doing histories and things of that, such as inheritance and such as following. A lot of it goes on because I mentioned farming. The way we've handled dogs and horses, we breed according to things that we want to get, and we hope that we get the right genetics.
And it works sometimes.
And it works many times.
So when did you start suspecting that genetics were the basis for personality?
Very early in life, as I saw people say to me when they were observing friends and relatives and colleagues and loved ones, and they would say, well, the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree, and they would say, the way you look right now, I have a picture that looks just like, and they would give all kinds of indications of heredity and of style and of coping style and of attitude and of way of laughing. And so I started picking this up as a young man, and I began to think, wow, what we bring in is really very important. And one day we'll get into it. By the time I got to college and began to study biology and genetics and genealogy and etc., we had a great base already for me to start on. And then, of course, as I studied the people like Carl Jung, who came up with archetypes, and others who came up with what they would say parts of self, and so people have been playing around with this idea and presenting different things. I tried to get a more global gestalt so that it covered all aspects.
Can you explain what gestalt is briefly?
Gestalt is when the gestalt is greater than the sum of its parts. So the gestalt is a final collection of the parts, but as they move in together, they create a greater dynamic.
The personality as such.
Not just its only personality in anything.
The whole.
Yes, right. So the term gestalt comes out of research in Germany. It's been developed over time. But Fritz Perls and his colleagues and all those who worked with him, including his wife, who was very astute, they used the term as they applied it to Gestalt therapy. So that the idea there would be these aha and awarenesses that would motivate parts of us. And then they came up with a number of little systems, and they had top dog, underdog.
Which means?
Which means that you could have two parts of you get into a discussion. And right there they do the empty chair and
in the counseling session.
In the counseling session, move around. Then psychodrama got a hold of this, and Marino did a great job in taking different parts, sometimes of a family, sometimes of a person, and then they play these different dramas with these parts. I obviously was the benefit of all those that went before me in these realms.
They laid the groundwork.
They laid the groundwork. And
But you mentioned mandala earlier.
Yes.
And you created what you call the self, soul, spirit mandala, the parts mandala.
Right. Now I borrowed that from Sanskrit and from Carl Jung. And Carl Jung's biographer, Hoyt, did a great job of describing the last years of Jung's life, where he became so enthralled with the mandala, seeing it as the total being, and then the parts. And once again, the universal object is a circle. It shows up in all kinds of philosophy and writings, and we think of it in regards to the way the universe looks.
Mm-hmm.
The Earth is a circle, not a perfect circle. We're a little oblong, and same with suns, and we think of life as a circle, and so that shows up in writing. We think of the 4 directions, in regards to the circle. Now, all of this that we're talking about briefly right now, we're going to open up. So we're going to have initially, 3 or 4 venues. This is for you and me. This is our
Conversation.
mentoring and our conversations, and I loved what you said, my conversations with my mentor, Dr. Strachan. And I more humbly think of it as Ryan and Raj. And that'll be our funny tag, Ryan and Raj.
Yeah.
Because I see it as an equal. Mentoring, to me, has never been, above and below. As a matter of fact, Sheldon Kopp, who wrote, "If you meet the Buddha in the road, kill him," which is a great throwback to the ideas that we're all equal. And Willie Nelson said it in a funny way, and just like, we walk along together.
Mm-hmm.
And so did Sheldon Kopp. And I love that.
Why does he say kill him?
Because the idea is that there shouldn't be a Buddha above everybody else, that we're all capable of the Buddha nature.
So anytime we start to idolize or project some sort of perfection...
The emperor has no clothes.
The emperor has no clothes, right?
There's a lot of...
the Mesopotamians, one day a year, there was what they did was this huge ceremony where they would basically, the emperor would get, shamed and beat. And so he had to, once a year, he had to confess all his sins,
right,
and level with the society.
Right.
And then the next day he went back to being the emperor again.
Right.
What a weird, thousands of years ago, more than 2-3.
Oh, yes.
People knew that we shouldn't, there's limits to idolizing.
When we encountered many Native American groups in our culture, as well as some other cultures outside of North America, one example with the Navajos is the potlatch, where a family goes along and then they invite everybody and they give everything away, and they sacrifice their sheep, and that's what's had for the dinner and so forth, and the meetings and gatherings. The idea being is that you sometimes level off. And so the same applied to the land. They never saw themselves as owning land.
Right.
It's everybody's.
Everybody was
land.
a part of the whole circle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so those things of nuclear and ownership came along later. They were developed and put in culture and so forth. The idea of owning things.
That's more of a Western idea too.
Yes, but it was also developed in Eastern as well.
Yeah. So, speaking of all things being equal, or at least equally considered, that's how we view the mandala typically.
Yes.
No part is good or bad.
Exactly.
No part of yourself, meaning whether you have a angry part or a very kind and nurturing part.
Right.
There is no hierarchy of good or bad with all that. It's just part of that circle of who you are.
Right.
The hierarchy of good or bad is just in simply how you use it.
Exactly, and what culture says about it.
Right. Yeah. What the dominant narrative
Right.
is about. Oh, anger's bad.
Right.
Or
But see, what happens
kindness
is
good.
we apply value in almost every area. I tease some of my environmentalist friends when they're upset by the bark beetle and the eating of the trees and the trees dying, and I said, in a spoof way, well, the bark beetle's just having lunch.
Right.
And you don't go beyond that. And if the lunch is good, he has more beetles to increase all of them having lunch.
Right.
So we think about that, and the same with the virus. We're now seeing a virus is much more productive than when we first encountered viruses. I want to, though, switch now. What I want to talk about for just a moment, what you and I are going to do. You and I are going to bring alive the self-soul-spirit model. And some of the examples are, you're going to bring something you're working on. Obviously, the confidentiality will be held, and the situation will be redesigned, but the dynamics will be the same, but it won't be recognized with anyone. And we'll actually do a supervision.
Yes.
And you'll ask questions.
And we'll bring that to the podcast.
Exactly. And then what I'm inviting your viewers to do and your followers to do is to, in comments or back to you in email, to send questions or answers or inputs that they may have, so that we make this...
So you can address their questions.
So we're going to address their questions.
Yeah. And I also, just so everybody knows, you know, we're going to do probably a series of, I don't know, several podcasts. This will be conversations, like you said. The other one will be a structural analysis of the self-soul-spirit model, so it'll be more teaching.
Yes.
And then, you know, we might even do a bigger project at some point, which is in the works.
Right.
But what is cool is that as you continue to return to the platform, the viewership will grow and people will become more familiar with your work, so we can build into more advanced teachings.
Yes.
Right now we're just at the very beginning of self-soul-spirit.
Exactly.
We're barely scratching the surface. I mean, you know, so that all being said, Raj, what's essential? What's the most essential thing that you tell people that have never heard of your model? Like, if you're just about to meet with a client and start working with their mandala, how do you bring them in?
Well, that's a simple question, but has tremendous complications to it.
Okay.
I can't answer it in a simple, even though it does seem like it deserves a simple answer. But you have to realize, so let's start with the premise that has to be there first, since it's going to be involved in a therapeutic or facilitating sense. The first thing is, I don't work on people. I work with people. Now we're back to meet the Buddha in the road. There's the equality. The first thing I have to establish that they realize they're going to do all the work. I'm going to do the facilitation, the creating of options, so forth. I'll get to the mandala in just a minute, but what I have to say to them is that you have to realize that you can't come to me for answers. The answers are all inside of you. Mm-hmm. It is my job to help you see possibilities. Now, I created the mandala waiting for the genome. So I need to say that, because what I'll say today to someone coming to see me may not be what I'll say in 5 years, providing I'm still doing this, or my students like yourself are doing it, the ones who've learned this model, have been certified. We don't have just a single voice. Much of psychology tried to move toward monoism, and that everything would kind of be sorted out, and they left it to the brain to be the executor and the voice. Freud broke from that and created three entities, and if Freud had gone with genetics or Darwinism because it was before him. Evolution was there. It had been brought to Europe, and
But he rejected it.
he chose something different. What he chose was the basis of the John Locke theory of the tabula
Blank
rasa.
slate.
The blank slate upon which
Come into the world, there's nothing there.
there's nothing there. You're neutral, and life experiences create who you are.
And we're all conditioned to be who we are,
Yes.
which is BS.
Well, it is, because what it does is give all the credit to somehow our life experiences as if we're only assimilating. See, now you, that's why I said it's really complicated. You've opened up a whole new era. When I started studying, Erik Erikson was one of the leaders in developmental, and he saw one of the first things that happens for an infant is that they assimilate. So he's seeing them as neutral. Now we know that from the time of conception and the developing of that infant to be, they're already accommodating.
Right.
They accommodate to what comes through the tube. They accommodate being within and whatever, once their hearing is going, or feeding, or kinesthesia. As the senses develop, they're accommodating actually in the womb. And then they accommodate to the birthing phenomena. Okay. Then once they're in the crib and we're feeding them and all those, they accommodate to that. That means they already have their genetic predispositions, and life then comes to meet them. So,
Wait, well, let me clarify that.
okay.
Because I think, just to be clear, so accommodating means that the way that that individual is interacting with the environment is totally unique to them.
Yes.
And they're accommodating based on either subtle body movements or gestures, or as an infant, you
As
can
an
only
infant.
accommodate in so many different ways, right? You're either internalizing
Well,
it, or
we don't know that. I mean,
as we would compare it to the wide range of an adult's abilities to interact with the environment, it would seem that an infant's abilities to interact with the environment are restricted.
the thing is, I don't like to reason that way. I don't like to reason about what not is. I like to reason on what is.
Okay.
Therefore, I leave the door open, and that way the accommodating can be broader. There could be certain genetic things
That we don't even understand
that
yet.
we don't even understand.
That's like what you said about this is how much of reality we see,
Right.
and this is how much is available.
Now let's take the very same thing. By our culturalization, we sometimes focus on what we don't want. So early in the sessions that I work with someone, we're off to the side right now. I'm going to come back
Bring
to
it back, yeah.
But taking that side, I constantly say, and because they do the work, what do you want? Where do you want to be? How do you want to be? Who do you want to bring? Now that brings me to the mandala. Since we're not a single voice, most of the discussions go on inside of us anyway. We say we go over things, and we will say this even before this work was created. Well, this part of me thinks that, or this part of me. All that I have done is to help you identify what you bring in. What I'm excited about as the genome gets done is, as the form of questioning I use, will they correlate with the genome, a characteristic?
Meaning the parts that you identify in the therapy are also correlating with the genetic parts that you bring in.
So now we bring up all the possibilities. We bring up traits and characteristics. And before me, there were teachers and those in the field of personality who laid out some of these phenomena, okay?
Yeah.
Now, I have to next introduce this. This is very early in the first session. I share with them where we are today, scientifically and philosophically, and on the basis of the whole realm of life, okay, and what life brings us, I share with them what we now know, which is anything that has a body is unique. So there are no two butterflies alike. We now know that genetically, that even the identical twins, when the two eggs are there, and the zygote splits into the two
The
of them.
zygote?
The zygote is the one egg.
Okay.
When it splits into two, they develop similar genetics and different genetics. So not even identical twins
Are
are
alike.
alike. The other thing about it is that the Buddhists are right, and they've been right all along. It took science to catch up to that, and now there's no such thing as space. We're all connected. So now what's being questioned, and it has been by a number of philosophical scientists, is something as broad as this. If something happens at this side or part of the universe, does it happen simultaneously over here? If there's nothing in between, is it automatic? Does it cross this distance faster than the speed of light? Those are all questions we have. Right now, we know that there are energy fields out there that sometimes we have the capacity, because of our own mutations, to receive. Okay.
Genetic mutations?
Yes. Yes.
So genetic mutations can affect your ability to receive certain...
But then those are called, by living, we call them epigenetic. So the very living. So now I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's go back here. So what I first say to them, you're unique, and we're all connected. And then I say, I don't know why we have a structure, but we have a body, and we have body parts, and they all have functions. I can't answer that, but we do. What I do know, though, is the life force, or consciousness, or essence, or being,
soul,
are in that body. It comes with a package.
Yep.
Okay? How did that happen? Well, when a pulsar lets go...
What's a pulsar?
It comes out of the... it's the beginning of new stars and new...
Okay.
It comes out of what we call a dead star.
Okay.
And what they end up being is wombs for new life. So out comes gases, and they form the sun. Out comes bits of matter and a little bit of electricity attached to it. They bond together. We call them pixels. That's one of the terms we use. A lot of them are similar. And they come together, and ergo we have our Earth. It's just the right distance from the sun, so it's not too hot, not too cold. And in the revolving process of day and night, we're able then to create an atmosphere because of the sun. Once the atmosphere, now we get oceans and creeks and rivers. And then, after a certain amount of time, it's all done by a timing within, those molecules deep in the center of the Earth start mutating and start coming alive.
And evolving.
Evolving. And here we are having this conversation.
What does that have to do with soul?
That is soul.
Soul is the
soul
process
is the
of
creator
life
of that.
force.
Yes, soul is the creator, and soul lives within, and then
the life force that drives all things.
Exactly. So then the physical manifestations are the basis of the life force of soul.
Wow. When you were explaining the pulsar and the pixels and the creation of the earth and the atmosphere and the rivers and the soils and all that, it reminded me of the human psyche.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. Once an environment is created, an interaction begins. An interaction between whatever level your genetics have developed, okay? So let's take a simple one. Somewhere between 90 and 99% of the genes in a great ape are in us, or sometimes even chimpanzee. So when we trace back, we go back to the first humanoid.
Did you just say we're 98% chimpanzees still?
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible.
Now, some things only 90. Some, I leave it to my colleagues to continue their research in genetics to find how close we are.
But close.
But close. Yeah.
Yeah, mostly.
Right. And you think of all the different kinds of dogs, okay? And then all the different ways they look. Yet they share a tremendous amount of the same genes.
Okay.
Okay. So we go from this molecule, if we go from something out of the center of the earth, even in the heat, we now know, and we develop. Okay. Then there's another factor, and this is the reason we can change and become, because there is a principle in the universe, and I've worked on this for a lot of years and just now beginning to write a paper on it, which is that the universe, from my point of view, and with the data that I deduce, because I don't have an induction way of proving this, strives for functionality.
The universe strives for functionality.
So if it gets something, it doesn't get it right. And a few years ago, a group of scientists took a tiny little organism that lives in the ocean and lives in a protected situation. And they brought the female out of that protected. She got bopped on the top of her head, so to speak. Didn't kill her, but it was, it was a blow. In one generation, the next group of eggs that she spouted had little caps, protective caps on the top of their head.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They evolved that fast.
They
mutated that
right.
fast. So
we see things like rabbits, the snow rabbit, the white, mutated in it because it matches and they're
matches
less
the snow?
Yes, they're less likely to get caught.
But back to the question around the evolution of the creation of the earth and the soul, and how that relates to the psyche. I think you were almost there.
That brings the biggest thing. The early Greeks believed the psyche was the soul, and then therefore psychology is the study of the soul.
Right.
The early Greeks had their word for it, anima and animus, and they called it spire, spirit. So that's very close in translation from them. They saw that as the great mystery and developed many ideas. What they saw as the soul has continued through philosophy and science, and I would say the simple elements of biology to be the consciousness, the essence, the being,
life force.
The life force. So because all those apply just equally in our terminology, I simply chose for my model what the Greek chose, the soul. Now, this is huge because for so long in science we went along because we couldn't find the soul easily, didn't know its origin, we decided the brain must be it.
The brain was the soul.
Right. And even when we were looking for we looked at the pineal gland in the brain and thought maybe that's the seat of the soul. Well, that turned out not to be true. And there's a bunch of things. Here's what we're discovering right now and why some of the great work that's going on in mindfulness. We have a number of great teachers out there right now teaching those elements of focus and mindfulness. The brain is a master computer, okay?
Yes.
If I use that as a metaphor or an analogy. The brain is not us. The brain is not the life force. The brain is like the liver or like the heart, but it has its specialty. The neurons in the brain have the job, and it's even compartmentalized. So we have frontal lobes, we have the temporal lobes, we have the parietal lobes, and we have occipital lobes. These different things carry on different functions. Okay, so I'll illustrate this in a minute. But we've operated for a lot of time is that if we study the brain and do corrections there, we can do corrections in the psyche, in the personality, in the ways of coping, in dealing with characteristics, in dealing with belief systems.
Okay.
But what we know now is the brain literally only does what some force within us
programs it to
do it. Whether those are parts or whether it's actually the soul. That's why I'm on slim footing here. This is more conjecture that I have stated the soul's job is to develop the brain to honor the parts in a way that is functional and to deliver at the end of a life well lived to spirit.
Soul-directed living.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're in the beginning stages with a client, and you're setting this groundwork for self, soul, and spirit.
Right.
Spirit is the potential that we could live into. Soul.
I don't know that. I don't know what spirit is exactly.
So you're more focused on self and soul. Spirit is for the unknown.
Let me just stop with spirit for a second. We have religions that have spirit as a entity that actually can intervene and change things here. Okay. And then we have it that it's just a big bang and things just got started and
the billiard ball effect.
Yes.
Yeah. Which doesn't leave much room for free will.
Well, let's get to that in a second. You're ahead of me.
That's another podcast.
Oh, that's another whole process there. But let me stay with that long enough to say the variety is tremendous. Okay.
Okay.
Man and I say humankind, as they developed, asked those tough questions. Where did I come from? What is this all about? Who am I? Who are any of these people? Why are we the same? Why are we different? Those questions always look for an answer. So when we don't have a easy answer, we create one.
Hence your famous quote, human beings are the only species that do exactly what they want to do and then make up a reason.
Yes.
Did I get it right?
You got it right. No other species, they operate in the here and now, and they operate with past experiences because they learn from them. Some dogs continue to get sprayed by skunks and seem to never learn. And some dogs, it's a one-time issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so same with porcupines and dogs. Okay?
Right.
Now, what I'm saying is that it's not that there's not a basis for some of our actions by how we've encountered life. But with humans, we don't really want to give ourselves the credit we actually do exactly what we want to do at any given moment, because we somehow developed over time this whole idea of something caused it. So that leads us into another whole realm. I'll just open it up real quick, and then this will come out in the podcast and more.
The structural analysis. Yeah.
But another thing that I'm on slippery ground, but I think I have good validation for, is there's no such thing as influence. All there is attraction and connection. When I studied those that got HIV and worked with a wide variety of heterosexuals, homosexuals, lesbians, when I worked with people who had it and were in relationships with those that didn't get it, then they should have gotten it. They should have got, but the HIV virus passed through and went out. We now know that not everybody exposed to Ebola gets it. And right now, from the latest outbreaks, many of the scientists and the biologists are studying why did they not get it? What prevented it? That's the attraction connection.
So let me clarify all that and summarize it and tell me if I get this right. So we come into the world with our parts,
Yes.
both biologically, it's all biological, but both purely physically and on a basis for personality. And we interact with the environment. We're exposed to quote-unquote viruses or different things that could impact us.
Right.
But it only catches if we have the part to receive that.
Yes.
So from a personality standpoint, you could bridge that and then say, your famous quote, you can only be rejected if you're rejectable.
Yes.
So if there's a part of me that feels deeply ashamed or insecure, and you tell me that I'm unworthy, then I will latch onto that.
Yes.
But if I don't have that part, and I don't come into the world with that vulnerability,
Right.
and you tell me that I'm not good enough, it will just pass right through me like the HIV virus passed right through.
Yes.
Okay. What did I miss? What would you elaborate on?
I would only enhance it a bit. You hit the nails right on the head. Those are all accurate phenomena. But I'm going to say that it's not a simple. It's based upon also a continuum. So if you bring a victim into the world, okay, because people have been...
What does that mean, bringing a victim?
You have a genetic predisposition to see things that happen to you through the eyes of a victim.
Okay.
Feeling that you've been being put upon.
So there is a victim gene.
So you can be victimized, but not be a victim.
Right.
But if you have a victim gene or set, that's why I want to point out, it's not one gene. It's
polygenic.
Yes, it's a lot and different clusters. And all of it, as they come together, will indicate
Gestalt.
strength.
Yeah.
No more than gestalt. Strength and or not. So let's say you come in with a victim, but it's not very strong. There's not many genes devoted to it. It's minor, okay? But it is a predisposition. That when you view it and an action comes your way, you will view it a little bit through the eyes of a victim, okay?
Okay.
Victim. But let's say you're raised well, you don't get victimized in school, and you don't have any real major traumas. So as you get to be an adult, your way of looking at it might be as simple as, well, why me? Why did the universe pick on me? Okay.
Why didn't the cab pick me up? And
yeah, I mean,
blah,
maybe
blah, blah,
very
blah.
simple. Okay?
Yeah.
Right. If you come in with a lot of genes devoted because of your history, and usually when I study with people who are victims, I can look back in their genealogy, and there's aunts and uncles and grandfathers and grandmothers
that did that.
Yeah. Now, and you're victimized, it becomes very, very solid. When I was 24, in practice, I realized that, and I saw it also through hypochondria. There's been a number of reports how many good organs are taken out because a patient persists. There's something wrong with them.
Uh-huh.
And that's been reported in the medical literature over and over again. I won't go into that, but the same principle applies to the victim, okay?
Okay.
They don't want to change. Now, why is that? Well, that's another whole phenomena based on cognitive consonance and cognitive dissonance. Once you have a belief deep about yourself and you view it through that world, you then to go find data to validate.
Confirmation bias.
Yes. Self-fulfilling prophecy. We have a lot of words about it.
So if you come in believing you're a victim, you're going to find all the reasons why that's true.
Yes.
And you're not going to...
Because the life will deliver them. And if life delivers you, let's say you truly are victimized, that makes it even worse.
Yeah, if you're abused or something horrible happens.
Yeah, and maybe continually.
Okay.
Now, there's so many aspects to that.
A lot of people
by the way,
aren't going to like hearing that. A lot of people, it's
course
going to
not.
hurt their
And
feelings.
particularly
It's going to
those
hurt their feelings to hear that.
who are in trauma. But
What-
again, let's use it about myself.
Okay.
Okay? I come from a long line on both sides of alcoholism.
Alcoholism?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had, when I first started drinking, that I could get it easily at 18. I was full-blown alcoholic.
Right.
I didn't learn to drink. All my friends said, Roger, you don't drink like the rest. You don't want to stop. And so I quit. And one of the reasons I quit is I went to seminary where drinking wasn't allowed.
Yeah.
So I had it easy. And for 5 to 7 years, so I didn't drink at all. Off and on. But I can look. My brother died an alcoholic. My father died with 52 years sobriety. My son is got 32 years. And there's alcoholism all the way through. I had another cousin die, and an aunt die, and a grandfather die.
Lots of alcoholism.
On both sides, yes.
So it's not...
The point is that as they come along, like my son, my 2 daughters, one has some issues, but my son, when he began to really drink, why he developed.
He got it too?
Yeah. So now he's clean and sober. Now the point I'm making is, yes, people are going to be upset, identified as victim, because right now we live in a blame society.
In a blame society?
Yes, we live in a blame society. Somebody's to blame why I'm not okay. Even our artists are addressing it, and Don Henley, a genius in music, when the Eagles came back together, the first song on Hell Freezes Over is Get Over It.
Yeah.
It's,
well, we really do live in a blame society.
We live in a blame. Somebody's to blame. Well, now, let me tell you how it starts.
Yeah.
A lot of times a parent will say to a 3 or 4-year-old, they do something, they knock a dish over it, because they're just experimenting with life. And what will happen if I knock this off? And they'll say, why did you do that? And now the kid doesn't have any clue at all why I did it. So he says, because the cat jumped on my shoulder, and then I knocked it off.
Right.
I mean, whatever it is, we expect to ask a why question and get a reasonable answer.
Even though the real reason is I just wanted to do that.
Yes!
I just wanted to.
I wanted to see what happened.
I want to see what happened. There's not always a fancy explanation.
No.
Got it. So we're about out of time here.
I know we are, and I want to say a couple of things. You and I have set up the possibility of 3 major formats. The one we're doing right now is live. We'll take real live situations. We might even do some self-soul spirit work in front of people and demonstrate. So all of you who listen to this podcast, please feel free to ask all your questions. Yep. This is the live activity of it. And
you can write your questions in the comment section on YouTube, or you can email me at Holsapple, HOLSAPPLE, R, the initial R, 32 at gmail.com. Holsappler@gmail.com.
Now, the next thing we're going to do simultaneously with this is we experimented with a couple of podcasts with general structure. But both you and I decided, no, let's do it in a continuum that starts with the beginning of how this model got developed and where it's going, and what the new psychology is going to look like. At that point, we'll bring in data from the National Institute of Mental Health, and we'll bring in. So we're going to do a structural academic series. With the same principle. Please ask your questions. Please give your comments.
That's going to be more professorial.
More professorial. Yeah. This is going to be more casual.
This is us shooting the shit.
It is. That's exactly what it is. And honoring the mentorship and honoring the equality.
Yes.
Because that's the way the model works.
Right.
Okay? The third venue is looking at it in different ways. But I'm going to present a couple possibilities, and I would like you who watch this podcast to give some feedback. We're thinking of doing a movie or a video
documentary
or a documentary on my life, the people I worked with, their stories, and all inclusive with a model.
Yep, with the self-soul spirit model.
Right. Now the other thing is I'm already starting to write a book, but maybe we'll shift from the book to the story being told like we do with Kindle or any other thing. So tell us what you would like.
Yes, yeah. Tell us what you want here from Dr. Strachan, and tell us what was insightful, where you need clarity, what makes sense, what doesn't. We'll try to bridge all the self, soul, spirit information for you. Just before we go here, I think we've got time for a 5-minute story. Do you got a good story for us about a client or anything like that you want to leave us with?
Yeah.
Great. Hopefully the wind's not too loud. It's been pretty bad here.
Well, it is getting into our microphones. I have so many, they're all rushing through my head. But I'm going to tell one that involves both living circumstances and genetics. And to show you, and also I'm going to bring in wilderness therapy, which I created at the same time, 1973. I'm working with this man, and he seems to get into places where he closes off and withdraws, and I know I'm hitting some data that's in there, some life experience, some genetic phenomena that brought them together, and I'm not getting it. He's closed off. It's not coming. The way it manifests is that when he gets triggered with this stuff that's in there, he often reacts aggressively and withdrawing. So you have a combination of leaving the scene and a combination of leaving some anger on the table before he leaves the scene. So it's almost, there's no way to deal with conflict resolution. It affects his relationships. But mainly, he's a very good manager and usually on top of stuff. Very bright, very creative. So we decide to go into the wilderness, and we go in in April, and we go in a little mountain area, and we're up at about 8,000 feet, and lo and behold, it starts snowing. Now the forecast had no snow in mind, but it's like happens particularly in Arizona, where I lived under the circumstances. The weather is the weather, and it can change all of it. So we had one of those freak April snowstorms. It didn't drop a lot, but it dropped about 6 to 8 inches. While we were in there, and that happened, he became disoriented. And he was trying to say, well, is that north? That's north, isn't it? I said, no, that's not. And when he couldn't have his directions right, he disintegrated. And he went into the tent, and he crawled in his sleeping bag, and he wasn't coming out. I gave him extra blankets that I'd brought in just in case. Anyway, and put those on. So he was warm. But he stayed in the tent almost 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Didn't come out, didn't eat anything. The next evening, I'm just watching and waiting. I said, what have I got? Well, let me see what it looks like. It looks like a pissed off 9-year-old.
You said that to him?
I know I said that to me.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying, what have I got?
What are you dealing with here?
What am I dealing? I'm looking at all the parts of me, and I'm trying to say, what is this? What do the behaviors look like? What do they kind of demonstrate? And I'm looking at something happened at that age. And
so you started observing the behaviors of a 9-year-old, so you thought, okay, something happened at 9 years old.
I didn't know that, but that's the question I asked.
That's the question. Okay.
I'm asking a lot of questions. And I'm getting the withdrawal, I'm getting the aggressiveness. He does not want to be here on this. I've opened up something that had nothing to do with me, but I opened it up just because I brought him into a snowstorm.
Yes.
So I'm to blame, but it's the snowstorm that's caused this reaction, and not knowing where anything is. So I said, so what do you do? But you build a big fire. I no longer have a small fire. I'm going to build a big fire. I make sure I have no trees around me, and I build a big fire.
Okay.
Okay? It's going to be warm. Then I make hot chocolate. So that's for the 9-year-old.
Okay.
So I make hot chocolate, and I build a big fire, and I invite him out. And to close the story off, there's a lot of elements that go beyond this, but to close it off, just this part of it. He opens up and starts talking. At 9 years old, his father came back from overseas service in one of our wars, and to maintain the confidentiality even further, I'm not going to say which one, and came home angry and pissed off and took it out on this man that I'm dealing with when he was 9 years old.
Oh, wow.
And it went on for quite a while.
So it was pretty abusive.
Yes, extremely so. So at 9, he was always looking for a way out. Now, what were the genetic phenomena? High sensitivity, which I'd already identified as mandala, and life experiences in a way he could just get triggered and, all kinds of things. What else did I learn? That he needed to know where he was at all times. He needed control of his life. Not knowing which direction he was and how to escape out of this snowstorm really rattled him.
Wow.
Because it looked like, oh my God, I can't
I have
just
no
go
control.
I have no control over my environment.